tour of this space from Deborah when I first arrived, and Jessica and I were just blown away by what's been built here over the last several months. We're talking months, and while it was years of planning, it's just amazing that this has all come to fruition in such a short period of time. And also the adaptive reuse of this space is something that we really celebrate at the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, and I'm looking forward to lifting up the work that's happening right here in Hartford to our network nationally. So while we're getting set up, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I run the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. Jessica recently joined our board. I wasn't sure who this crowd was going to be. I have to admit that I am terrible at all things making, but I love the process of production and learning about it and telling the story about it. So Jessica brings the maker hat. I bring the government lawyer planner hat, so the probably more boring to some of the folks in this room. But between the two of us,
can you step up to the mic? Can you keep the mic?
All right, we have the presentation loaded. I have my timer here, and so you'll just give me a heads up when I'm about 20 minutes in. And you all can see the slide there. Great. So I'm going to start with a little story. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. That goes back about a decade ago. So it was well before my time at the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. And indeed, it was well before the time that the Urban Manufacturing Alliance even existed. We're a relatively young organization. And I was a graduate student in Brooklyn, and I was planning a vendor market series in a neighborhood called East New York. The program was called Lots to Market, and the objective of the program was twofold. First, it was really to identify and lift up the entrepreneurs that were in that community. And second, we were trying to breathe life into what was an underutilized or a lot that was sitting dormant, at least for the time being. And so the project involved a number of groups pulling them together. The Street Vendor Project, where I was working at the time, which is an organization based in New York City that provides legal representation to a range of vendors, food and merchandise vendors. The Pratt Center for Community Development, which is one of the founding organizations of UMA. They were helping to sort of lead the planning and visioning exercises around this market. My law school thankfully helped us negotiate an agreement with the property owner so we could use this lot on an occasional Saturday. The local community development corporation that served that surrounding neighborhood. And there were churches and schools that they helped connect us to, and we forged relationships with all of them. That's a lot of folks for this vendor market. And in the end, we uncovered dozens of small businesses. And many of these businesses I would call makers and manufacturers. Although they didn't fit any traditional definition of manufacturing, they were producing a physical product for sale in their community. And some of them were selling these products for the very first time. So you had stationery and scarves and artwork and jewelry, and there was so much talent in this community to expose. It had just been invisible for some. And there was this one vendor that I got particularly close to, and you'll see that white and blue image on the screen. Those are cake pops. And these cake pops were amazing. They were just so delicious. And I'll admit that one of the joys of getting to know this entrepreneur was the fact that I got to spend time eating cake on a stick when I was chatting with her. But it was certainly not the only reason that I wanted to get to know her. What I saw in this woman was a quest for something much bigger. Her experience at that market was a catalyst, but soon she took a leap of faith and she started to manufacture those cake pops in a commercial kitchen. Sort of the equivalent of a makerspace, but for food. And now today she runs a full-service catering operation. It's called Everything Sticks, which I think is just such a clever name. And she employs several folks in her neighborhood. She contracts directly with the city of New York. And that market was the little nudge that she needed to scale her company. So why am I telling you this whole story about a cake pop manufacturer and a vendor market? As we're talking about building a robust innovation hub here in Hartford and New England broadly. Well, first, I want to underscore the power of ecosystems. Think about the number of organizations that were involved to get that market right. And second, I want to encourage us to cast a wide net when we define innovation, when we define manufacturing, when we define making. All makers, in my mind, and I think for so many of us we see this, they're innovators. So to illustrate the importance of ecosystems, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Urban Manufacturing Alliance and the work we do building ecosystems. And then I'm going to introduce you to Jessica, who will talk about how you can leverage design building design thinking to really affect systems change. So let me start with the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, which is the organization that I have the joy of leading each and every day. So my work is harnessing the power of production for cities. I'll say it again, harnessing the power of production for cities. So what do I mean by that? Each day, you have makers, manufacturers, designers coming together with sweat, ingenuity, technology, design, to create something new and create something different. And they are a force for change in neighborhoods without even realizing it sometimes. So what is the power of these businesses? Well, first, they're fueling a cycle of innovation. When you have a maker in community, you can rapidly iterate. You heard Deborah talking about those curtain rods, right? That's happening all the time today in our neighborhoods as manufacturers and designers test out product designs. You refine those products, and that cuts across all subsectors, from fashion to food to Internet of Things. They are breathing life into places that matter to people. Makerspace, the space that we're in today. Light manufacturing spaces filled with small tenants. Retail stores with locally made products. These businesses may be small in size, but they are creating a tremendous sense of community. They are creating a sense of place. And then, perhaps most importantly from where I sit, is the people power, right? The people that are able to realize their dreams, making something with their hands. The people that are able to access family-sustaining wages through the production economy. And I am talking about people with a variety of skill levels, from a high school degree to a technical training program to those that have advanced degrees. But despite this array of benefits, many of these businesses continue to be invisible or not well understood by local economic development practitioners. So we at UMA set out each day to help fix that. And we create the kind of conditions that support these businesses. So conditions, what do I mean by conditions? So again, let's talk about people power. The talent that you need to feed into these businesses, either from an entrepreneurial pathway or through a workforce pathway. You need space, right? To run a company, you need physical space to operate. It could be in your home, it could be a makerspace where you can share tools, it could be a standalone manufacturing facility, but space matters. You need capital. We're working on a project right now where we're thinking about what are the creative ways to deploy capital to makers and manufacturers. Capital that's patient, capital that's quick moving and responsive to purchase orders. And you need community. Community to support you as you bring your product to market, community that is your end market. And these conditions, they make or they break companies. And they also meaningfully shape outcomes in our communities. So what does UMA do to address these conditions? For us, it comes down to ecosystems. It comes down to breaking down silos and creating these well-functioning connective tissue to support the manufacturers in local communities. So the bulk of our members are actually not makers and manufacturers. They are the groups that are connecting to those makers and manufacturers. Now, ecosystems that we think work best are ones that are grounded in place, like that vendor market, and ecosystems that have an explicit commitment to equity. And equity can mean a lot of different things. Often we focus on race, but broadly you can think about race, gender, age, people with disability, returning citizens. Manufacturing can matter to these communities, and it can become more and more accessible. And that's something we fight for daily. Now, ecosystems, they often join together the people that you naturally think as being a part of that ecosystem, right? So who would you think of being a part of a manufacturing ecosystem? The makerspaces, the city agencies that serve the businesses, you've got the business owners themselves, you've got financial institutions. But would you think of a faith leader as a manufacturing practitioner? Would you think about an educator as a manufacturing practitioner? What about a museum or an arts organization? What about a public market? I could go on, and that's the point.
is that we have to broaden our definition of these ecosystems and bring a diverse set of voices to the table to actually make sure making and manufacturing in our community is serving our community. And so my hope is at the end of this day-long conference, and at the end of the time that you spend with Jessica and I and so many other of the great speakers today, that you think about the ecosystems in your own communities, the work that's brewing in your own community, your own cities and towns, and you build upon those networks. So now we're gonna take a little tour. Let's hop on a plane together. You guys have your tickets? You ready? Just kidding. We're not gonna get plane tickets, but we're gonna try to hop to Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis. And if we run into delays, meaning if I ramble, we may have to cut some of those cities, but I'm going to try my best to move quickly through them. These are some of my favorite stories coming from members in our network. So let's start with Pittsburgh. I want to tell you a little bit about a community development financial institution called Bridgeway Capital. Now, most of the time when you think about a community development financial institution, what do you think about? Shout out. What do you think about? Loans, right? That's what I had in my notes too, low interest loans. And that was really the front door for many of these businesses. But Bridgeway started observing that businesses, including many manufacturers, were approaching them in search of financial products, but they really needed a more integrative set of supports: business coaching, mentorship, affordable space, access to new markets, many of the conditions we mapped out earlier. So they started to forge some partnerships to offer that set of services. First, they launched a program called the Craft Business Accelerator and hired a maker from their community to lead that program. And so it's a platform for makers and manufacturers that connect to one another, they mentor each other, they encourage one another, but they do something else. They forge unlikely partnerships, surprising partnerships, and one that they forged was with the real estate development community in Pittsburgh. So they saw all of this real estate coming up around them, largely housing, and they said to themselves, how do we place our makers and manufacturers in those real estate projects? We have cabinet makers, we have tile makers, we have artists, we have lighting designers. They can all fit into these spaces. And so they set out to, one, understand the businesses that actually wanted to scale and grow, because not all businesses do, and start to matchmake with the real estate development community. And they had strong enough relationships on both sides that it worked really well. And so you can see here, these are some pictures of locally produced products in Pittsburgh that are now placed at scale in real estate projects across the city. And it was this sort of unlikely partnership, this expanded view of an ecosystem that opened up a new market for the makers. And then the other thing that they did was they took on the project of bringing on what we call at UMA a mission-driven industrial development. That's a mouthful, but essentially a low-cost manufacturing space run with an underlying mission in mind, which is keeping the production economy alive. And so there, they started reaching out to their local philanthropy, the R.K. Mellon Foundation, who made a sizable investment in that real estate to bring the project to fruition. And what they did was they invested in ecosystem managers that reside in the space. They have an equity and inclusivity specialist in their space that is every day focused on mentoring the business owners of color, both those that are tenants in the space and those that reside in the surrounding Homewood neighborhood that this building is in. So what do we take away from all of this? One, building networks matters. Two, putting resources behind equitable economic development matters. And three, identifying champions from places that you wouldn't expect can make a real difference. All right, you ready to head to the next city? Yes. Okay, I see nodding heads. Let's go. All right, next we're in Chicago. This is a group that we work closely with called Manufacturing Renaissance. And they're a large organization. They do a whole number of things. They have a youth council. They do technical training for high school students. But they realized that there was a real perception problem facing the manufacturing sector. I see nodding heads. That is a real challenge that we face as practitioners in this community to help neighborhoods reimagine the manufacturing sector. And so how are they going to do that? They had to open up people's minds and hearts to what manufacturing looks like today. So they brought a group of ministers from across Chicago on manufacturing tours. This is not a whole lot of investment. This is about forging partnerships and building trust and exposing people that don't ordinarily get to walk on a factory floor to that space. And the ministers fell in love with the spaces, they fell in love with the opportunity and the promise that those spaces held. And then they talked to their faith-based communities about the opportunity in the manufacturing sector. And it wasn't just kids that they needed to get to, it was their parents. Because even if kids were interested in manufacturing careers, maybe they were exposed to a makerspace or a technical training program at the high school level, their parents didn't want them to have anything to do with the sector. So it was this intergenerational approach that they were taking to ecosystem building that has helped to create a new level of openness to the manufacturing sector in Chicago. And I am constantly encouraging communities to look at the faith-based neighborhood as a source of change and inspiration in the economic development realm. All right, Detroit, let's go. So now, this is an easy trip from Chicago, thankfully, and we'll move through this quickly. And we're going to talk about workforce training. So it began with sort of the manufacturing darling in Detroit, Shinola. I'm sure some of you have heard of Shinola here in this room. They manufacture very high-end leather goods. They're very well known for their watches. They're gorgeous. But they really celebrated the fact that they were producing these products in Detroit. And there were a few trends that Shinola was really attentive to in their own manufacturing practices. One, they would often talk about the fact that it's not a skills gap that we're facing, but rather a values gap. And we're not celebrating the masters of these trades. And not only were we not celebrating them, they were retiring out of these jobs, and we were losing their mastery forever. This sounds really dire, and it actually is. And so what they were trying to do was lift up the stories of these masters and talk about their craft, but then also how you join that craft with technology. And so the team at Shinola started to talk with other garment and textile manufacturers about this, and they found that many of the firms in their area were facing a shortage in the workforce, like this workforce gap, which again, Shinola would link to a values gap. And they said, why don't we join together and create an opportunity to train the next generation of industrial sewers. It's called the Industrial Sewing and Innovation Collective, or Center, ISAC for short. And they engaged a wide array of partners. They got their local community college, Henry Ford Community College, on board to do some of the training work. They brought industry partners together to create an industry-led curriculum. They got that curriculum approved by the Federal Department of Labor. And now they're able to pilot that curriculum, not only in Detroit, but in cities across the country. They are creating a social enterprise so that when apprentices finish their program, they have a place to land. And they're not just creating a social enterprise with that end market ready to go. They engage some of their large corporate champions to be that end market for their social enterprise. In that case, they're producing workwear. So again, this is another really robust ecosystem that ran through the city of Detroit to yield the ISAC program for me to share. And this is a project that Ilana and I, who you'll be hearing from later, toured together. And it's a project that I just love from the bottom of my heart. So it's called Brick City Makes. This is a long-standing affordable housing developer who had a ton of experience developing housing in the neighborhood that saw this old manufacturing building and had been used by a single tenant for almost its entire history. The single tenant vacated the building, and so now there was an opportunity. And they saw an opportunity to pivot from housing in this one piece to create multi-tenanted industrial space, that same mission-driven industrial space I was talking about in Pittsburgh. So they forged a partnership with a manufacturing partner, in that case it was St. Louis Makes. They engaged their local university to anchor the building. They started to talk to businesses in their area, and they had a long waiting list of businesses that were ready to get in this building once the space was ready to go. They raised a lot of money, and they solidified some tax credits as well. They lost some tax credit eligibility, which we can get into offline for those of you that are interested in real estate development. And in the end, they came up short. They didn't have enough money to give this project a go. I think I'm still holding out a little hope that maybe something will turn around, but it's looking like this project is not going to move forward. So, would I call this an ecosystem failure? No. This is, again, an example of forging these partnerships and being really intentional about it. But what it points to is the work that we all have ahead of us to build a stronger and more forceful narrative about why manufacturing matters to neighborhoods. We see investment flowing into spaces all the time. In fact, just blocks from Brick City Makes, there's very significant investment in a tech space. We have a well-developed apparatus around affordable housing, but that's not the case when you want to launch a makerspace or you want to really fuel manufacturing in the community. And so we, the people in this room, the manufacturing practitioners of all sorts, we're in a position to change that, to shift the narrative. And so I leave you with that anecdote to say, not that we shouldn't be hopeful, but rather that we need to speak louder. And so now when we talk about systems change and connecting to one another and building this new narrative, I wanted to bring up Jessica, and I wanted to bring her in this audience, to this audience for a few reasons. One, it boosts my credibility in terms of not having that maker background, to have somebody with a maker hat on. And two, to think about outside of our own box, and I say my sort of past government experience and urban planning experience box, and how the talent of designers and makers and manufacturers should be at the table and can actually help us solve and improve on the ecosystem challenges that we face. So let me hand it over to Jessica.
Hi, my name is Jessica Hemmer, and I am the founder and creative director of Hemmer Design. Before we jump into a lot of what Lee was talking about, I want to explain a little bit about who I am and what I do and where I've come from. So I run a company called Hemmer Design, and we are a collaborative product creation studio located in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are located on Main Street in downtown Cincinnati. We're the white front building right there. It's a really great old location. I just found out that the building is 120 years old, and so we're right in the heart of kind of the revitalization that's going on in downtown Cincinnati. What we do strategy creation, front-end innovation, trend and market research, product line planning, apparel, product and service design, garment engineering, advanced manufacturing, product development, material development, and sourcing. So with all that being said, I don't fit into a clean box of being a manufacturer. I'm kind of in a bunch of these adjacent categories, but I work through the manufacturing process a lot. But I wouldn't call myself a maker or a manufacturer, but I'm part of this ecosystem. Who we work with. So I have the privilege of working with lots of different types of companies, anyone from a startup all the way to a big organization, and sometimes I work with material suppliers to help them bring their concepts to life so they can showcase them to companies abroad and bring more people buying into their products as well. So our sweet spot is really in new category development, mostly in apparel, garment design and engineering, advanced material development, and advanced manufacturing. So how did I get here? And I promise this is leading to something that's super interesting and relevant to you guys. So my background, I went to the University of Cincinnati School of Design for Fashion Design Product Development, and that program is really amazing because of the co-op program that's there. So it's a 5-year program, and while you're there, you have to go to school full-time for 2 years, and then it was on quarters, so every other quarter you were working full-time within the apparel industry. So I spent a year and a half full-time working across the country in different places to gain industry experience and knowledge, and this is relevant for, I think, the maker movement as well as the manufacturing community as well, to look at models like this for how we can incorporate this into current education systems. From there, because I had all these amazing connections, I was able to, even in 2008 when the economy was pretty crummy, jump into a series of jobs that has been pretty phenomenal. So I got to go over to Bologna, Italy. I ended up in Plano, Texas, Baltimore, Maryland, New York City, Boston, and then back home in my hometown of Cincinnati. It was always my plan to come back home because I wanted to build a community in Cincinnati, and I wanted to go out and learn these skills and then bring them back to the place that I'm from. And I think that's where a lot of people and a lot of boomerangers are happening currently. More and more people are wanting to move back to the small towns where they're from, or medium-sized towns. Cincinnati's not necessarily a small town. So these are some of the brands that I had the privilege of working with through my corporate design career. So I worked for a company called LPK Trends, so I got to learn a lot of how to really look at a market and understand the opportunities when it's in a market, and then to build relevant forecasting capabilities, like what's going to come next, like where are we going, what's going to happen here, and how do we work to build better product that suits a consumer's needs. I worked at JCPenney and I worked in intimate apparel, so learning how to build product that's not really close to the body and how to make a female customer feel a certain way and really evoke an emotion. Then I went over to Under Armour, so total flip, and I worked on the outdoor team, so it was skiing, snowboarding, hunting, fishing, military, and tactical products. From there I went to Woolrich, which is a company that's a 200-year-old American heritage brand, and I got to work on launching new collections for them in New York City. And then ultimately, I ended up in what I think is probably my most hands-on manufacturing role, which was at Bemis Associates, which is a thermoplastic adhesive company in right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And so we worked within the athletic apparel industry to help companies like Nike and Under Armour and Lululemon and Adidas bring their products to life using our thermoplastic adhesives. All of that being said, I finally decided that I wanted to move home, and I decided that I was going to take a leap to start my own company. I was very fortunate because I have all these experiences and insights and also connections throughout the industry, so it was a fairly smooth transition for me. It's not always when you're taking that leap. So this is a little bit more about what I do and how I do it. So it's important for me to understand the markets that I work in. These are some of the areas that I work within and some of the things that I have to pay close attention to. So advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, insourcing, outsourcing, sustainability, fast fashion, wearables, and the list goes on. I also have to understand, as I'm working with brands, what is the essence of what that brand is. How do I understand what their needs are and how they want to be presented to a consumer? And that's really important for me to understand as I'm working to build products. Another thing that I have to understand is the customer journey. So when I'm building a product, what is happening with that consumer and how they're interacting with the product? And how are they interacting with it digitally, online, as they're looking to research something and purchase it? How are they interacting with it in a store? And then ultimately, once they might have the product and are wearing the product, what's their wearing experience and how are they interacting with the product in that way? Another really important thing for me when I'm building products and working with brands is transforming expectations. So this is, there's a lot of different facets to this. So this could be while I'm working with a brand, really getting them to think outside of the box as to how they should be approaching a project, but also how do we transform the expectations of what the consumer expects when they receive a product. And then this is the creation process, is ultimately define and observe, empathize, visualize, ideate, prototype, test, and refine, and then kind of start the whole process again. So it's a very iterative process. What I think is really interesting is that these are my skills, but as makers and manufacturers and designers within this community, these are the skills that belong to you as well. So you might not think of them as formalized as I do. I have a kind of very creative way of thinking about this. Maybe it's a little type A, actually, of how I'm formalizing my thought process. But these skills belong to you just in your everyday as you're working. And with that being said, I think it would be really great to talk about how we can build intuitive manufacturing ecosystems using those skills. So first off, what is an intuitive manufacturing ecosystem? And this is a term I'm coining, but it has more to do with understanding the people who are going through the manufacturing process, so the practitioners themselves. I think that this quote, which has more to do with design ecosystems than necessarily manufacturing ecosystems, can be applied to manufacturing. So the great challenge that will confront those who wish to champion design in business will be to grapple with organizational ecosystems that are both dysfunctional and inherently obstructive to the spirit and process of design. So if you really think about that, if we're operating within dysfunctional and inherently obstructive design processes or manufacturing processes that really hinder the spirit and process of design, that's a huge problem. That's something that's a big thing to overcome. I would call it a wicked problem, and not just because I lived in Boston. That's actually a term, a wicked problem. So a wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. So like the obesity epidemic, or pollution, or global warming. These are all wicked problems. They're big and they're complex and they're smushy and you can't pin them down. So because of that, we don't necessarily have a straightforward way of tackling them. Every industry that I've worked in has had their own set of wicked problems. And I've done a little bit of digging and kind of analyzing of the world that I live in, and then working with UMA to identify some of the wicked problems that are currently facing the manufacturing ecosystem. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly, and I would love to hear if anybody else has any that I don't have up here. I know there's probably thousands that I don't have up here, but there's barriers to accessing capital, lack of access to affordable space, skills and talent gaps, issues with talent retention, lack of access to machinery and technology, non-existent or disconnected communities, scarce business or development resources, minimal business direction and guidance, lack of access to markets, and policy that impedes equitable growth. But like I said, there's many other things, but these are like some big problems that there's not necessarily a straightforward answer to. When wicked problems wreak havoc on manufacturing ecosystems, the issue is that it creates inequality or inequity, loss of profitability, loss of productivity, and loss of talent for communities. So it's, these problems in and of themselves, it's like, okay, cool, who cares? It's really what they cause that is the big issue for communities. So how exactly do we solve these wicked problems? I think that we have to look, in my case, beyond product design, which is what I am as a product designer, and we have to take our skill sets that we use in our making and manufacturing and design capabilities. We have to take those skill sets and we have to utilize them to solve a new problem. Not how do we build a better product, but how do we build a better system. So here's the real question I think we have to focus on. Understanding what wicked problems are and that we have the tools to actually solve them. I've done some framing work to kind of identify what I think our big question is that we have to solve for. How do we build thriving, innovative, and strategically minded ecosystems through culture, systems, and processes that support the practitioners, so these are the designers, developers, sourcing specialists, suppliers, makers, and manufacturers, to create better connectivity and therefore increase equitable economic development? It's a huge question, and I would love to give you the answer to that question, but I don't have the answer. But I think it's the question that we have to be asking. So I'm going to ask it again, but I'm going to simplify it a little bit. How do we build thriving, innovative, and strategically minded ecosystems that support the practitioners to create better products and therefore increase equitable economic development? Big. I think that while I don't have the answers, that we as designers, makers, and manufacturers have tools in our toolkit that we can utilize to solve these problems. This is not a one-size-fits-all answer at all. This is taking different design practices and utilizing them within your communities in order to create solutions that really fit your community and your community's needs. So these different concepts are empathic design, design thinking, and service design. I have already been given the 5-minute mark, so I'm going to kind of speed through these. These are things that you should be looking into and kind of understanding, and specifically service design I just think is super, super interesting. Like I said, I'm going to speed through the actual things, but note those and look into them. So if we revisit those wicked problems and we think through the lens of those different empathic design, design thinking, and service design, if you really go into those practices, there's some things that can come out on the other end once you do that within your community. So it really is a practice of doing this with your community. And I think the important piece there is that the practitioners have to be involved in the solution creation process. They have to be involved in helping to form the ecosystem. It can't be put upon them. But the practitioners, like we said, practitioner is a broad term that means designer, developer, manufacturing person, supplier, maker. It's like we have to all come to the table and work together through kind of a design process, which I think is tried and true, that can really be applied to this industry and help with creative problem solving. If we do that, there's some key takeaways and outcomes that I think we can come to. Like I said, I don't have the solutions, but I have some good news of where we can end up if we put these things into practice. One of them is that I think there would be a shift in the invisible infrastructure. So this is like how people actually just like work. You can't really quantify if a community is working. It's like it's just kind of the underlying energy between how people are interacting is really what would happen here. There's also the idea that it would become an anti-silo. So instead of me working over here in my world and you working over here in your world, it's that we would become more intertwined just in the everyday and how we interwork. There would be an openness, so a sharing kind of mindset in regards to resources and capabilities and contracts and all sorts of things like that. There would be a growth and innovation. Job creation would happen. There would be talent retention in cities, which I think is super important. And there would be upward mobility, and specifically upward mobility in communities of color and disenfranchised communities and things like that. There would be economic growth and then regional agility, and I think that that's a really important thing. If you teach people how to learn, which I think is an important thing, it's not just teaching them a specific skill, but teaching them the capability of learning and problem solving, which I think is a part of this whole ecosystem building, then your region can actually be a lot more agile and not as reactive, but more proactive as things change. So this is a reminder of what to do. Make sure you include your practitioners. Identify your wicked problems, and they're going to be different in every community. Ask the real questions, stock and utilize your toolkit, and ultimately build a more intuitive manufacturing ecosystem. And that's that.